certainly a lot going on here in the city of Dallas, and I appreciate our United States Senator John Cornyn being willing and suggesting, in fact, that we have a conversation here in Dallas about some of the issues that are being raised right now in our country as it relates to criminal justice, the police, and the relationship between the police and the community. So I'll have a little more to say later, but for now, I'm going to introduce to you all Senator John Cornyn and let him say what he wants to say, and then we're going to actually have an opportunity for everyone at this table to have some words, share with us what's on their mind, and then we'll take questions, I believe, later on from the media. Senator?
Well, thanks, Mayor, and thanks to all of you. I called the mayor, who I've come to know and admire and consider to be a friend, and asked him for his help after the George Floyd killing. And I said, you know, I need your help to identify leaders in the Dallas area who can help inform me, help me understand better about not only the problem, but also what some potential solutions may be. I did talk to the Floyd family before the funeral, and Rodney, George's brother, told me, he said, well, we're from Texas. And I said, I know that. The family's from Houston. And he said, well, we want some Texas-sized justice. And I said, well, to the best of my ability, I will try to contribute to that ultimate goal. And as I was telling the mayor here just a few minutes ago, it's hard to know what to say to a family who's lost a loved one, particularly under the circumstances like this. But what I did say is that it's my hope that something good can come out of this terrible tragedy. And I actually believe something good can come out of this. To start with, we're having conversations like this where we can, we don't have enough conversations with each other these days. And we certainly don't do enough, and I include myself in this, doing enough listening. There's a lot of talking, but not enough listening. And I just think, obviously, the origins of of injustice in our country are well known to all of us. You know, the original sin of slavery, for which our country has paid a terrible price over many, many years, and we still have a lot to do. And so in Washington, we will be convening and trying to address through legislation various things we can do to help the police, provide resources for training and the like. One of the ideas that I'd been working on since last year with one of my Democratic colleagues, Gary Peters from Michigan, is the creation of a National Criminal Justice Commission. This would be something like the 9/11 Commission you may be familiar with. Congress isn't very good at taking a difficult topic like this and looking at it comprehensively. So what we've done in the past with 9/11, and we've done it in other areas as well, is create a bipartisan commission that then can make recommendations to us. Because I know while we feel that the need is urgent, and I know we need to do everything we can do here in the near term, when you're angry or you're afraid or you're mad, you don't make your best decisions. And I think we need to be as thoughtful as we possibly can be given the fraught and challenging times we're living in. So thank you, Mayor, for convening this group. I think it was just a week ago that I called you on a Saturday morning, I believe, and asked if you'd consider doing this. So thanks to you and your team, and thanks to everybody for being here. This is really important, and it couldn't be more timely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator, and I appreciate you. Appreciate you reaching out, and I appreciate you being here. I'll take just a few minutes, 5 minutes at the most, I hope, to just say a few things, and then I'll go through everyone who's here and give them an opportunity to speak for about 5 minutes, and then we'll see what kind of time we have left. But, you know, I'm very glad that we could all be here today. And I just want to thank all of you who made the time to attend this meeting. It's likely, in fact, I know it is the case, that not everybody around this table agrees on what the path forward should look like. But I'm here to tell you that it's my personal belief that that's actually okay. I don't think we have to all agree on what the exact path forward looks like. And you weren't asked to be here today because we all agree or so that you will agree. You were all asked who are here today to be here because I think the senator would agree that it's past time, it's long past time that we have some very frank and honest discussions about the future of our great country, state, and city. We have to be open, and we have to open ourselves up and be willing to have our viewpoints challenged and to be willing to explain to others why we think what we think and how we see the world. We have to be willing not just to have our voices heard, but we have to be willing to take the next step in this process together. Policy change is not something that was ever designed in this country to be made in an echo chamber. In Dallas, I know for a fact that the city council is willing and ready to have these frank conversations and discussions. And I know that our Community Police Oversight Board, under its very capable leadership, is ready to have these conversations as well. Here at the City of Dallas, we also have a critical function of oversight. We have to be honest with ourselves about what we do well, what we can do better, and where we have failed in the past to live up to our highest ideals. But it's a mistake to think that we're here today only because of George Floyd. We're here because George Floyd was just the latest life taken too soon across this country. We're here because they exemplified, all of those folks exemplified what people of color have long said is an issue in this country. I also believe that we're here because we're all willing, everyone at this table is willing to acknowledge at this point that the status quo is just unacceptable and it's unsustainable. And I don't think that's necessarily a small accomplishment. I'm not sure that we would have been able to even agree on that just a few years ago. And that actually gives me a tremendous amount of hope. We do have systemic issues in this country. It's not just about the police. Police misconduct is a branch. We have to be willing to talk about the tree of racial injustice, a tree that has its roots in slavery. That's just a fact. And I'm committed to working with all of you and others to build a more equitable society in our city. I grew up in this city, a person of color, in an underserved community in West Dallas and Oak Cliff. What we're talking about here today are issues that have hung over our city and our country's heads my entire 45 years of life, and of course, beyond that. Investing in our people and improving our communities is the reason why I chose to go into public service in the first place, and it's certainly why I ran for mayor. And I know many of you around this table also committed your lives to public service for the same reason. And I know that not anyone here believes that they have all the answers, and that's why I'm so pleased and I'm grateful to Senator Cornyn for suggesting this meeting, and I'm even more grateful to all of you for accepting the invitation to be here. I, like you, Senator Cornyn, am here to listen and I'm here to learn, and I want to thank you all again for your time. And at this time, I will turn it over to the Deputy Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Dallas, who is also the chairman of the Committee on Public Safety, the Honorable Adam McGue.
Thank
Chairman
you, Mr.
McGue.
Mayor. Appreciate you. I think when you go through something like our country and our city has gone through, you see this over and over again. And even while you're watching what happened to George Floyd, you start thinking about what's going to happen next. What's the next one? I've heard leaders in our city say we couldn't handle this. And I think you're always anticipating the next one. And I'll just, as I've watched this and I've seen the protests and I've visited with so many people and been involved in so many of the different discussions that we've had, what if we can do things that allow us not to have that next one? And I want to stay in that space as much as we possibly can when we start thinking about all the options and all the different things that we have to work on as this group. In Dallas, we have made strides. We have done some amazing work due to the work a lot of the people sitting around this table. I think every bit of our focus should be around three main things. One is building trust. Two is improving and increasing the safety for each and every person in this city. And I think now more than ever, providing clear lanes of our strategies and how we're going to, whether it's on funding in our budget or whether it's the steps we're going to take, but having clear lanes of the different roles. And so over the last couple of years, as we've created an Office of Police Oversight, the Citizens Police Oversight Board, we're continuing to look at that process and see what changes, what improvements, what strengths can we add to that in a way that makes sense and helps do those things, build trust, increase the public safety, and provide the clear lanes. We have, in the city of Dallas, and I know you're very much aware of this, Senator, and I appreciate how you've always been willing to take our calls and our meetings as we talk about mental health, and specifically here around our Right Care program, and again, providing lanes where we're using innovative approaches to deal with some of the strategies that impact public safety in a drastic way, and expanding our Right Care program. But there's more we can do on the screening and prevention side of this. A lot of times we're still dealing with crisis as the crisis occurs, and we've got to move that intervention earlier back. And so I think national funding and appropriateness for dealing with mental health impacts our homelessness issues, impacts our community issues in a lot of spaces up and down. So looking at that, we talk about training, and I think that's coming out of something as universal that we all believe we need additional training in our police department on de-escalation, on community conflict resolution. I'm a mediator by profession, and I believe there's so much of this can be dealt with through effective community dispute resolution. And so additional training that help our law enforcement officers, but then not just that, but in our community, in our schools. Our youth lack some of the dispute resolution skills that we need, and I think there's areas there where we can grow together in that place. We've expanded implicit bias training in our police department. I want to thank the chief for all of her efforts around these areas. Again, just the beginning, but there's so much more we can do. In the city, we've done a good job, right? But we cannot have an ounce of racism in our police department. We've got to find ways to vet that out. No more passive acceptance, no more turning around and saying, oh, they're a good person, but we got to root out each and every incident, whether that's on social media, whether that's in just private communications. It's got to be fleshed out. And I think the more we change the culture in that regard, the better our community will be with trust, with safety. Other things that I know we're all working on, but bail reform. Here in the city of Dallas, we've also created an integrated Office of Public Safety to look at some of these options that are geographic-based crime reduction and things that we can increase the safety in our areas by looking at some of the many issues that are facing specific areas. Our mayor had a task force and some of the members here were on that task force with some really good options on bringing lights and interveners into certain things. We had OGU briefed here and some great leaders in our community that are engaged and willing to intercept and intercede in some of these situations early on and use innovative techniques. So as the mayor said, I'm hurt. I see the pain, I feel the pain. But I am optimistic, and I have a great deal of hope that this will be an opportunity for the city of Dallas to take leadership in a lot of what we already done and a lot of things we can do coming up. We just need to focus on those areas where we can all work together. But thank you for calling this, allowing us to participate and being here today. Appreciate you.
Chief Hall, you had to share the microphone. Yeah, you guys should share the microphone. Yeah, there you go.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Senator Cornyn, for hosting this and giving us an opportunity to come to the table and discuss. In law enforcement, we feel the pain. We feel the same pain that every one of our members in our community and individuals across this nation is feeling as it relates to Mr. George Floyd. 800,000 members of law enforcement, that's how many exist in this country, watched an individual who shares the same uniform, wears the same badge that we wear. We watched him murder another individual with reckless regard for human life and with no empathy. And what we came to realize, and I think most of us always did, that there are challenges in law enforcement. We have to admit, acknowledge, atone for the things that we've seen in law enforcement. And although there has been many, many strides and many, many moves in our organization to stamp out this behavior, it exists in our agencies. And it exists because systemically and culturally, policing has some challenges. And so what we recognize in law enforcement today, and I'm thankful for the men and women in the city of Dallas who has worked alongside of even councilmen for the last 3 years to come to the table and identify some of the challenges that we face in broken relationships. Our policing strategies over the years has created a wedge between law enforcement and our community, and we have to work to fix it. And we've been doing the work. So that's not the question of whether we're doing the work or not. We have advisory boards. We have stakeholder meetings where individuals come and tell us what they want to see different in our organizations, and we've made every effort and changes in those areas within our general orders, but it's bigger than that. We have to acknowledge that we need early warning systems in our police departments to ensure that we are able to mitigate any challenges that officers are having very early on, or look at some of the issues that may be prevalent right away. An early warning system that notifies a supervisor immediately when an officer has 3 or more instances or incidents in 1 month, so that we can get in, intervene, mitigate, get the right services, or say that this individual is not fit for law enforcement. Additionally, we have to be more transparent. When things happen in our organizations, we have to be able to push that information out. One of the things we're working on is a video release policy to make sure that within 24 to 48 hours when a officer-involved shooting or a critical incident happens, that we can get that information to the public. There are challenges, whether it is the legal system with the DA in pushing this case forward or trying it, in those challenges, but I can say thank you, DA Cruzo. We've been working to figure out how we can do this and how we can do this effectively so that everyone has a bird's eye view into what we're doing in our agency. We have to become a legitimate organization that our residents, business leaders can truly trust and believe in. And we only do that by being as transparent as we possibly can. We also have some systems in place that keep law enforcement officers who should not be on our department. We can, as chiefs, terminate individuals, and then we have a system that brings them right back into our organizations. And we also have individuals in our organization who cannot testify in court, but they're still parts of our organization. And so we have to say, if your integrity doesn't line up with what we do in law enforcement, then We have to make some tough decisions. I will stand by the fact that the Dallas Police Department has some of the best police officers in this country. And the majority of us, the large majority of us, show up every day with the right intentions. But the ones that don't, we have to have a swift system that allows us to get rid of these individuals, because everything someone does in law enforcement, it doesn't matter if they're in Portland, Maine, or in Los Angeles, California, it affects everyone wearing this uniform. So we cannot afford to have systems in place that tie our hands. We have work to do. We haven't always done it right. Sitting in this seat, I've gotten it wrong on some occasions. But what we do in those instances is we acknowledge it, we own it, we fix it so we can move forward. We're committed in the Dallas Police Department to continue to work alongside of our community. One of the things that's truly important, and I'll call out Mr. Martinez, he and I have worked together as it relates to training for our officers. Our officers have to be well trained, and right now they get great training, but there's better to come. Our training system needs to be in lockstep with our colleges and universities so that we're getting an academic view on diversity, implicit bias, and overall training for officers. We need to make sure that our community is working alongside of us so that we're hearing what it is they truly want us to garner from diversity, inclusion, and implicit bias training. So it's not our perspective. It's not from a law enforcement perspective, but it's from a community perspective as
Chief,
well.
I'm sorry.
That's my time.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure we don't run out of time to make sure we get to everyone. But there will be an opportunity, I think, maybe to answer any questions folks have for you. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Sheriff Brown, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Senator. Thank you for hosting this event, and thank you for the invitation to be a participant in it. I want to say that I think that we all recognize and acknowledge that we have a long way to go, and that there is no magic pill. If it were, then we'd come forth with it and we'd say, okay, here's the magic pill and all of our issues be resolved. But instead it is a process. And so this is what we have started here today. It's all about a process where we have those difficult discussions, and we have to reach a point where we are comfortable in having uncomfortable conversations. I was thinking about the fact that we're all cloaked in our masks today. And I don't know about you, but it's very uncomfortable for me. It starts to get on my nerves after a while, frankly. And so I take it off. But although it's uncomfortable, it is something that has to be done. It is something that is necessary, something that we have to do. And so this is like the process. It's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. It's something that we have to do. And we, as law enforcement leaders, must set the example. I have a scripture that I love to recite to my people, and it simply says that to whom much is given, much is required. That means simply that as law enforcement officers, we have to recognize that we have been given great responsibility. And because we have been given great responsibility, we have great responsibility to answer for our actions. That means that we have to be accountable for what it is that we do. And so even today, I'm thinking, how do we take what it is that has happened, not just recently, but things that have happened in the past, those flashpoints in law enforcement, how can we take those and insert those into our basic training and teach our folks who are coming through from the beginning what it is to truly be a trusted law enforcement officer? So I think that what we have to do is we have to work on the training that we're giving to our officers. In addition, we have to continue to be accountable to our community. And furthermore, we have to interact with our community in instances where it's not necessarily an enforcement action. We have to be in the community. We have to go to the people, and we have to learn our people. Because, you know, people fear what they don't know. And so if we don't know one another, we tend to fear one another. So that's why it's important for us to get out into the communities and to continue our community policing and not let it just be a catchphrase, not let it just be something that a couple of people in each department participate in. It needs to be a philosophy, and it needs to be one that is genuine, one that is clear, and one that says not only to the community, but to the employees of the police department that we are involved in the community, we care about the community, we are the community. So I am thankful again for the opportunity to just participate in the discussion today. Thank you, sirs.
No, we're glad to have you here. Thank you very much. And we're going to turn it over now to our distinguished district attorney, John Crusoe.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Senator. Briefly, before I make my remarks, I think the last time I bumped into you, if you don't remember this, you wouldn't have any reason to, was at DFW Airport, you and your wife, and I had a little fellow about yay tall with me. Well, he's 6 feet now, about to finish his second year at UT, has no recollection of our encounter and says hello. So anyway, it's a long time ago. But anyway, I agree with everything that is said here. We have a lot of work to do. The foundations of where we are go back many, many decades and centuries in this country and, of course, in this community. But since I've been district attorney, I promised to do something that I did as a judge for 21 years, and that was to improve the process, if we could, and also to keep data on what we're doing and whether we've made any improvements and where perhaps from my standpoint we need to be. And so I ran on that, I was elected on that, and I've done that. And I suspected some things, and I think a lot of our community suspects that we have two different systems of justice, in a sense, and I think that that is true based on what I've discovered since I've been the district attorney of Dallas County. It was something I suspected, but now I have the numbers. And if we start talking about at the lower levels, the entry points to the criminal justice system, most commonly it's marijuana, misdemeanor marijuana, and another aspect that hits on other things that you as a senator have focused on through legislation in the past. And when we talk about criminal trespass, we're talking about mental health, and we're talking about homelessness. And I was fortunate enough to be named when President Bush was in office to the Dallas Task Force on Homelessness. So I've dealt with this issue before. So I want to talk to you about a couple of things. First of all, the arrest numbers for people of color for misdemeanor marijuana are grossly disproportionate to their numbers in the population, 80 to 90%. And I say 80 to 90 because there's confusion in criminal justice on how to label white and Hispanic. So somewhere between 80 to 90% of the people in this community who are arrested for misdemeanor marijuana are people of color. But of course, our numbers in the population are nowhere near that. Is this something new? No, it's been for decades, and it's across Dallas County, it's across the state, it's across the nation. But nonetheless, it breeds a sense of distrust and mistrust by the community when a community is policed more heavily and more often and charged with criminal offenses, even at that low level, that other communities are not charged with. And so what we have is, we have a policy now in the district attorney's office, upon my coming into office, that in order to correct this imbalance, this moral imbalance as I see it, that we're going to reject these first-time cases, and we have. Now, there's a moral component to that I just talked about, but there's also a fiscal component that's to the benefit of the county and to the city in the rejection of those cases. Because before we can prosecute those cases, each one, number one, needs to be tested, and we think that we have saved the city of Dallas close to $200,000 in 2019. And when the state of Texas passed the hemp versus marijuana law, it caused new instruments to be purchased, new people to be trained, and a much higher cost per test. And we think that we have saved we think, based on what we see, close to $500,000 this year. So in times of tight budgets that we're about to see, these policies not only have a moral component, but a positive fiscal component to the city in any jurisdiction that's filing these. Of course, the argument can be made it's illegal, of course, but we're talking about disparity, and let's be realistic. You go up to Oklahoma, no problem. Carry it, smoke it, eat it, do whatever you want. Everything's fine. But nonetheless, we have that. So that's what we see. We look at criminal trespass and homelessness. We are working feverishly in the district attorney's office to come up with a solution to the police having to take a mentally ill homeless person to jail. When we do that, we cost this sheriff a lot of expensive jail space. We looked at one individual, one person named Linda, and we looked back. She's homeless, she's mentally ill, she's been arrested numerous times for criminal trespass, and we think that she has cost the county, just one person alone, and all these arrests for these conditions that cannot and will not be treated in jail, close to $100,000. That is a waste of time and money, taxpayer money. So what the district attorney's office is doing is trying to come up in the city of Dallas. We have a location. We need a little more funding. We have a lot of stakeholders in, but a location for the police to take that person. Now, what else is at stake? Patrol officer on the street time. It takes up to, depending, and I was corrected yesterday by the sheriff, it is possible that it may take an officer up to 4 hours, usually not, to book somebody in jail. If we're booking somebody in jail, oftentimes for a gram or two of marijuana, and if you want to know how much that is, it's a sweet and low packet on your restaurant table. That's often what we're doing, okay? And we're booking that person in jail, and I'm not accepting the case, then that officer may be off the streets and answering important calls for up to 4 hours. That's another manpower issue. So there's a moral issue, there's a manpower issue, and there's an economic issue with the way that we administer police justice in this county, and the district attorney's office is trying to correct it, but also examine it and give these numbers and information to our stakeholders so that they can make the appropriate decisions that they feel. So with that, I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. District Attorney. Appreciate you being here as well. Frederick Frazier.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Senator Cornyn, this distinguished panel. I represent the Dallas Police Association, and I'm also on the President's Council or Commission for Law Enforcement Administration. I took that appointment in January, not knowing a lot what to expect, but we've done a lot of work since then. And COVID has slowed it down a little bit, but we've been pushing forward. I think everybody has slowed down a little bit because of COVID. Not the police officers on the street, but everyone else that's had to do meetings. We've done it a different way. I want to express what we've been doing on this commission and how we've been doing it. It hasn't been done in 60 years. That's way too long. And we're seeing some of the ill effects of that right now with Mr. Floyd's death. We've had 9 full hearings, 35 panels, 125 witnesses, 190 statements of individuals, interest groups, 160 working groups of experts have come through our meetings since we started. I've got one tomorrow. I'm flying up next week, and we're actually going to meet in person for the first time since February. With that, we have civil rights groups that we've asked to come in. Community engagement organizations we've asked to come in. They have denied. They don't want a seat at the table. I can't fix that. You have to encourage them that they need to be there. If we're going to make something a recommendation, they have to be at the table. Everybody at this table understands that. That's why we're all here. We want to fix something. We do have a broken system. We have broken parts of it that we can't fix. I'll give you an example. On our chokeholds, Dallas has banned that since the 80s. The total neck restraint that we used to use we called the LVNR when I came on in 95. I'm still a working officer. I've been here since 95. We trained with the LVNR. We got away from it in 2004 when David Kunkel was our chief, and he got away with it. He also got away with chasing cars at the same time. It was a smart decision. We didn't need to use that, only in a deadly force situation. And you could understand if you were about to be killed and you needed to stop something, if that was the only way you could stop it, that's the right way. Our training here in Dallas is excellent. And I know some folks probably don't think that. But out of the training for the state requires is 696 hours. We get 1,472. So think about that training when folks say we don't have enough. We get a lot here. We have the longest academy in the country. That makes a huge difference. We do de-escalation training. We have for 10 years. I'm one of the teachers. I understand the de-escalation. We have to have it. We need to know that not because somebody is mentally ill, you just have to shoot them because they're holding the knife. There has to be the situation. We have to have the right situation when you're going to pull that trigger. I think Chief Brown said it many years ago. You have to be responsible for when you pull that trigger. And we understand that. I carry a gun. I've got a gun on right now. I understand that is a weapon that can take somebody's life. I think everybody watched that video in Minneapolis, and we saw that 8 minutes and 46 seconds go by, and nobody did anything. That's where we start. We start with why he was on the ground. We have a case here in Dallas. We need to go back and look and say, why was he on the ground? What could we have done to fix that? We need to understand that that technique should never be allowed. That man was under control. Mr. Floyd was under control at that time. There was no reason to be on him. He should have been propped up. He should have sought medical assistance for him, and he should have been put where he needed to be put, and then we would not have a story today. Everybody knows that. Everybody that's ever been a cop knows that. I can't change that. It happened. But we can change it going forward now. By if this happens again, you had the systematic approach to change it. You gain control, get him up, getting her up, him up, medical assistance, and if you have a duty to intervene, then that's your responsible as well. If I was there, it wouldn't have happened. And I know my chief is sitting right there, and she knows if I was there, that wouldn't have happened. Our officers would die right now for that man, and they would die for anybody in this room to make sure that that didn't happen, because we're going through hell right now. The whole world is going through hell because of one person. But we need to fix it, and this is the start. And whether the President's Commission is going to fix it or everybody in this room is going to fix it, it's going to take everybody. So I want to thank you, Mayor, for putting this together. Thank you, Senator Cornyn, for putting this together, the media, and everybody sitting at this table. This is the start.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. Next, Chairman Jesserobo and Obakari from.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for inviting me to sit on this panel, and Senator Cornyn, thank you for convening this meeting. Where should I start? I am a black man, and even if I did not have a mirror, I'm reminded of it when I turn on the TV. Even if I didn't have a TV, I'm reminded of it when I get in my car and drive to work. Even if I didn't have a car, even if I didn't listen to the radio when I'm at work and someone says, hey, can I call you Jay as opposed to Jay Swarobo, I'm reminded I'm a black man. Not only that, but I experience racism even on a microaggressive level. We're here talking about policing, but I think we need to have a larger conversation, and let's start here. A policeman that makes an error in judgment gets a second chance. A black man and a woman that makes an error in judgment gets prison time. Let's start there. Many of those lapses in judgment are crimes out of poverty. I grew up in the 90s as the mayor and chief, and I have friends who were introduced to the jail to prison pipeline in elementary school and in junior high due to going to reform school. I have friends who lost the ability to go to college because of the fact that they were arrested and convicted on drug charges, and as a result could not get federal student aid. I think as a senator, you could change the law tomorrow, removing the question of asking someone that fills out the free federal aid form if they have a drug conviction. Let's talk about the opioid epidemic. We're showing a lot of compassion for those that are suffering from opioids. What happened to the compassion for those that were suffering from crack? We talk about where are the fathers? A lot of the fathers are in jail. Why are they in jail? For committing crimes out of poverty. I grew up in a single-parent household. Luckily, I had a grandfather that was there for me every day. A lot of black men weren't as fortunate as I am. But one thing that we have to understand is that there's a difference between a crime of malice and a crime out of poverty. No one wants to be a drug dealer. No child decides that when I grow up I want to be a drug dealer. And most drug dealers barely make enough money to take care of the basics. But when you have a young man he sees his mother breaking her neck every day to try to take care of the family, and he can't get a job, he has limited options, what does he do? He does whatever it takes in order to take care of his family. You have young men who are skilled in accounting, marketing, and sales, and they can't get a job in a Fortune 500 company because of the fact that they have a conviction on their record. And they can't go to college because of that conviction. But we have to talk about the fact that if we really want to fix policing, we have to fix our criminal justice system. Because our criminal justice system is designed to punish, not rehabilitate. We have to allow people second chances, true second chances. You should be able to take part in the American dream just as anyone else. And for far too long, the black community has lived in a different America. An America where you look outside of your neighborhood and you see a war zone of over-policing, crime, poverty, food deserts, substandard education. But then you turn on the TV and you see this glory that's America, this miracle. Where's the miracle for them? Our community has lost faith in institutions and leaders. We saw in the last presidential election that there were more people that didn't vote than did. That shows you that there is a lack of faith in our governments. We have to earn trust. Right now, the conscience of our nation is speaking. There are people speaking in all 50 states on Black Lives Matter. And I think that one of the things that no one should ever mention is that all lives matter. That should not be mentioned from anyone's lips until we recognize that Black lives matter. Because until Black lives matter, all lives don't matter. Thank you.
Chairman, would you identify the organization that you are the chairman of, for the record, for the media that's here?
I'm the chairman of the Dallas Community Police Oversight Board.
Thank you. Juan Olivo.
Yes, Juan Olivo, also with the Dallas Community Police Oversight Board. I serve along Mr. Chair. Again, Mr. Mayor, thank you for the appointment, and sirs for this discussion. It is mentioned before several times that these are the type of conversations that we need to have, right? And it's hard to have these type of conversations because we have our own biases against the other members of the group and the community. As Mr. Chairman said, there's that lack of faith in institutions. Senator, I was born and raised here in Dallas, the mayor. On the other side of the town, East Dallas, in a single parent household as well. And I credit my grandfather for instilling in me a faith in our country's institutions. And the reason I say that is because Latinos come to this country and raise their children coming from countries that lack the type of legitimacy in institutions like we have here. Sure, we are a bit far away from where I would want us to be, right, in our legitimacy and our faith in our institutions, but it is not like any other countries, and I know you'd agree with me on that. But like I said, these are difficult conversations to have because we need to peel back that biases and come to the table, and if you look around, this is a pretty diverse group. There's a lot of people involved, and we all share the same goal, right? We might have different pathways to it, but we need to come together and see how we can go ahead and fix this. Police brutality is not exclusive to Minneapolis, Minnesota. We've seen it here in Dallas, Texas as well. In the early 70s, a 12-year-old boy, along with his brother, were taken away from their home by a Dallas Police Department officer. And he was investigating, if I'm correct, a burglary in a vending machine. The police officer took the two boys in his cab, in his back seat, took his revolver out, and in process of investigating that burglary, he used Russian roulette, right? He eventually kills the young boy. His name is Santos Rodriguez, and next to his brother, right? And so, like I said, it's not exclusive to the times and to that state. Oh, you've seen a white man, die at the hands of police here in North Texas by the name of Tony Temple, a white male. Both in John, a black male, and that's Tanya Jefferson. Now that one, it hit hard because she was, playing video games with her niece or her nephew. I can't remember. I'm a uncle to 15 or 16 nieces and nephews. I've lost count, to be honest with you. Your typical large Mexican family, right? And I play video games with my youngest niece, who's 6 years old, and I couldn't imagine, how she'd grow up knowing that, I was murdered right in front of her. I'm playing video games by a police officer. Now, this happened in Fort Worth. But it hurts whenever our city goes through things like the 5 police officers that were murdered during a protest, and also hurts when our committee members are also, killed in the hands of police officers. And so it all goes back to that, having those tough conversations, and I'm glad we're here to discuss that. And so I want to offer a story on, and I think this goes back to implicit bias. I went on a police ride-along March 13th this year, right as soon as Corona started hitting, the government started issuing all these restrictions. And the police officer I was in the ride-along with, I had asked the deputy chief if I can get assigned or go be assigned to a station that patrols my neighborhood I grew up in over in East Dallas. And I was fortunate enough to be assigned to one. And this police officer lives in the northern suburbs of Dallas, knows my neighborhood like the back of his hand. He really does. And so it goes to what you were saying, Chief Hall, not, the majority of police officers, I know I'm confident, put on that uniform to do good. And there's some that fall short of that. And that needs to be addressed through either implicit bias, either more implicit bias training, funding for that, or, and I've seen the bill that you've mentioned, you're trying to push for as a senator, and there are some good points there, but I think we can be a little bit more aggressive on certain areas such as like the no-knock warrant, and I'm sorry I'm all over the place here, I'm trying to draw my notes down, but I'm trying to arrive to my point here. It hurts seeing that people don't have that faith in these institutions, and it's our duty, along with our colleagues in that community police oversight, to increase that community trust with the police department. And one of the steps is going and is access to police-involved altercations, and I'm proud to announce that a unanimous vote to ask our city manager for more access to our police monitor. And it's small change, I understand that. It's baby steps, I feel, but we're going to need help at the federal level and state level. And
thank you so much. Sorry to have to cut you off, but we are trying to make sure we have time to get to everyone before questions. Mr. Rene Martinez.
I'm going to take the liberty of age as a privilege, since I think I'm the oldest guy, including you saying I'm old. And take off a little bit. I want to do two things. I want to give you a little bit more history than one, because I'm older, not wiser, I'm older. And then have two asks of recommendations asked how everyone in council. About 47 years ago, Paul, bear with me because you heard the story. Santos Rodriguez was shot and killed about 2 blocks from my house on Cedar Springs and Lookout.
start of reform, of some reform within the police department. Chief Frank Geisen, at that time, was a very progressive chief. And he turned to a group like this, blacks, browns, American Indians, and said, what do we need to do to bring about change in the police force? Demographics were totally different, 8% Latino, 27% African American. Fast forward to that, now it's totally different. And so a group of us made those recommendations. But we went on the same premise, Chief, that, and I'm not saying you've done this, but we, as a community, that there are a few rotten apples in the force. Get rid of them, everything gets better. And that was really a false premise. Instead of looking at the system, the institution that needed change. So we made recommendations. Police training, the first racial relations training in the academy started. 6 weeks, 600 officers, a group of us. We recommended changes in the recruitment of officers. There was literally no women on the force. There was a height requirement. You had to be 5'10". So I'm the exception. I'm 5'11". But most Mexican Americans are 5'6", 5'7". They're so we changed the height requirements, weight requirements, education requirements. Clearly, you had a high school degree or a GED, you could get in. We recommended college credits to be taken. The grand jury the following year, Mr. Crezeau, the following year, we did not have any Latinos serving on the grand jury. None. 1974, the first Latino. Fast forward today. What are we talking about? In essence, we're talking about, again, systemic changes, institutional changes. There are a lot about excessive force by the police officers. You're going to hear a lot about more training. We're all in favor of that. But I think it's got to be bigger. And I think it's got to be broader. I think it's got to be at 3 levels. Legislation at the council level, legislation at the state level, and here's where the asks come from you, at the federal level. Grants are great. We're going to get grants. We're going to get grants. But that's a drop in the bucket. What I would ask of you, Senator, and I consider you my friend because I've worked with you and supported you in the past, is that you have to take a stronger role in terms of the dynamics in Washington as it relates with the president's rhetoric that is going against everything we're talking about in this room. You've got to take that role. You represent us. You represent me. There's legislation, as I understand, coming out of the House. It's got some bipartisan support. May grow. It's going to get to the Senate. I expect the same leadership from you to take that on and say this is not a Democratic issue. Racism is not Democratic or Republican. Okay? You've got to take it on. You've got to lead. You've got to take that lead. So those are my and being able to stand up and saying this rhetoric of divisiveness, of racism, has got to stop.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Perfectly timed, and appreciate it too. Mr. Derek Batee. No, the green one, I think. There you go. Thank you so much. Sammy Berry.
Should be bipartisan. Senator Tom Scott is leading that, and I think that will help get it through Congress, is my belief. The other thing that I want to say is we need to restore trust in communities of color. To do that, we need to see real substantial change that can be measured, but it also can be reported on. We must move away from the theoretical discussions, and those are important, but we need to move to actual implementation of change. One thing I noticed on yesterday, what I saw at the Gateway Church on yesterday sends the message that President Trump is really not serious about making the changes that we need to make in this country. The Dallas police chief was not there. The Dallas County Sheriff was not there. D.A. Crusoe was not there. But we had people there that really, from what I saw, some of them don't even think we have a problem. I hear a lot of discussion about a few bad apples. The real issue to me, and this has been said before, is the systems and processes that produce bad apples and allow them on the police force in the first place. There's a blue code of silence, a blue wall of silence, a blue shield of silence, and it must be addressed and eliminated. There is a police culture that encourages good officers to look the other way. There is a culture in police departments that reward bad officers and allow them to thrive. Cultures in our police departments need to change. For example, when police officers talk about a justified shooting, it is a quote-unquote good shoot. We're talking about a human life here, and it's boiled down to a good shoot. We need to stress de-escalation in our police departments and not good shoots. If we pass laws to clean up the culture, then we can eliminate, I believe, the bad apples. We need full investigation of all the police department deadly force actions that have been taken, to me, since the year 2000. Too many of our sons and daughters have been killed and officers involved not indicted, and they've just been able to move to, be fired in some cases and move to other police departments. If a police officer is in uniform and they respond to an apparent crime being committed and their body cam is turned off because they're off duty, I think that body cam needs to be turned on. No-knock warrants should be eliminated and outlawed. We need legislation that prohibits the use of fatal techniques in our training, while also prohibiting the use of military-grade weapons, as this equipment, to me, has no place in the hands of our police officers who are hired and paid using our taxpayer dollars to protect and serve our communities. Any legislation that moves forward should contain both measures. It should be mandatory that all police departments reflect the diversity of the communities that they serve. I think that will help deal with the issue of over-policing. And then finally, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Cornyn, now it's time for the Republican leadership, I believe, just as he was saying earlier, to speak out against the rhetoric that we're seeing coming from the White House or from anywhere else that suggests that we don't have a problem. Now's the time to be on the right side of history, and now's the time for us to take this moment and seize it and make the reforms that need to be made. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we close out with Pastor Rush, in terms of the roundtable speaker, just want to make sure we go back and everybody identify which organizations they were with for the media's benefit. So I believe, Juan, you identified yourself, but Mr. Martinez, Mr. Batee, and Sammy Berry, if you could just tell which groups you're with.
Sammy Berry, Dallas West Church of Christ.
Eric Batee, Dallas Southwest High School, soccer alumni organization for the Southwest Coalition for Better Dallas.
Martinez, North Dallas High School, and
All right, Pastor Rush.
Pastor Ricky Rush, Inspiring Body of Christ Church, founder also of the University of Dreams, which is a school that was opened to close a prison. I have to ask myself a question also. Why am I here? I'm hearing everyone talk about why they're here. I have a different approach to the mayor and to Senator. Thank you so much for your leadership. To our brave, courageous chief, and all of you who stand in the form of leadership, taking criticism, knowing that when we stand for others, we sometimes have to fall ourselves. I want to approach all of this different. I hear everybody's opinion, everybody's approaches. The mayor and I both grew up in the same part of this city at different ages. I have to ask myself, why am I here? My mom was killed in my face in this city. I hear everybody's emotions when it comes to watching a man die. I'm here because I watched her die. I watched her die. At that point, I realized there was nothing that I did wrong, but I held that guilt for a long time. And I'm here today because that was back in the 1900s. Okay, I was a kid. But I also am here because I still have a vision of 2020. When I went to get my glasses, the doctor asked me once, did you want 2020 vision? And I said yes. And now 2020, I'm not really sure, but I talk a lot about one of my favorite movies. It's called The Titanic. And I don't think the Titanic sank because of the iceberg. I think it was maybe built for it. It could have taken anything, I think. And from studying it, it didn't sink because of the engines failing. I think the Titanic sank because the guys that were watching from the deck, and I've said this before, had low-powered binoculars. And in order to see an iceberg, you have to have high-powered binoculars. You have to see far beyond where it is. And I just believe that the guy that left the duty before, that left the Titanic, just didn't have, the captain didn't have high-powered binoculars. So the Titanic didn't sink, I think, because it hit the iceberg. I think it sank because it didn't have, it sank because of lack of vision. If we don't see further than what we see now, I've seen this picture before. I could be a very bitter man. I preach the gospel, I teach, we have school, because I see what happens if people don't see beyond someone taking their last breath. I don't ask kids anymore what they want to be. I ask them what problem they want to solve. And I'm not speaking for Mayor Johnson, but I know he's here because there's a problem he wants to solve. And I just believe that. We have different priorities, I think, now than having better training. I think we need to stop talking about taking away the jobs of our police officers. I think that's not the solution. We call our police officers for too much. We're calling police officers to, and I'm just going to be a little facetious here, to change diapers, to get cats out of trees. And there should be other people dispatched. We need funding to help other people dispatched. to know that there's a problem that maybe an officer can't handle. As a pastor, you would be amazed at the calls that I'm asked to answer that I've never studied in. But if not, then we're sometimes called not being there. We have a very serious issue that I know that we have to deal with now, and that is the issue that we have the death of trust. And where we have the death of trust, we're going to have bad things happen. I am not a product of the system, but I very well could have been. At my mother's death, I had enough in me, and I'm sure I'm talking of a lot of people here who have witnessed bad things, to either be created to hate or be given an opportunity to say, I can solve this problem. And I thank you so much for inviting me here, just to hear whatever little bit I have to say. I'm not totally prepared to deal with a lot of the emotions that are going on because, you know, I bury people like this. And I have to leave a burial of a child that's 2 years old to deal with a burial of a man whose wife just had surgery, who can't even be in the hospital with her. It's a lot, and I'm not asking for sympathy. I come from a different place with this. And I don't think that sometimes we see it in the same way. I think there seems to be a problem with access to information when it comes to knowing this. I'd like to know, since we're here to deal with the issues that the people are concerned about, because the people have made a statement now, they want to be heard. What would happen if, and if this is crazy, it's just crazy, okay? But I'm the same guy that wanted 20/20 vision. What would happen if, when a police officer, if to make the people feel trust again, if a police officer that can ask for my driver's license, if I could give him my license, but maybe at the same token, he can give me just a card with his background on it, just something to say, hey, you give me something, I'll give you something. You know, I was written up last week for something, you know, I don't know how realistic that is, but it really does make the communication a little bit better. And I want to say to you, Mr. Fred, I've never met you before, but you were right on target. If our community could hear the training that goes into this, the overtraining, because we don't see police come through training. No one sees what happens when a mother's raising a child. They just know when the child has a mistake. That was very powerful. I don't know if I'm out of order for that, but thank you. I needed to hear that. I need that presentation presented to young people who need to be encouraged to be a part of the police department. They need to understand the training, because I think all of us in here, my athlete here, he didn't just get tall. He grew up in this sport. You know, I tried to do that same thing. I just didn't grow in it. I had the heart for it, but I couldn't do it. But if somebody trained me, I promise you I could slunk. They would probably lower the goals, but I'd be a good guy.
Pastor Rush, I'm sorry to cut you off.
And I missed it. Thank you. 20/20 vision.
No, I appreciate you, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but what I want to do now is give the senator the opportunity to close us out with any final closing remarks he might want to make, and then we're going to make, if anyone here who would like to make themselves available to the media to answer questions, that's what we have time allotted for. So with that, I would just turn it over to you, Senator Cornyn. Thank you again for being here, and go ahead and close us out.
Well, first of all, let me say thank you to the mayor for answering my phone call and being so responsive, and to he and all of his team here who've made it possible for us to gather together. I'm in your debt. I think we all know that we're at a very dangerous tipping point in our country. And it's not, in many ways, it's not a news story, but this is, as I think the mayor said, the latest episode in a long story that started at our very origins of our country. And it's, I've listened to some of you say, well, this isn't just a police issue. And I think that's right. That's right, because there seems to be, as was pointed out, very different experience depending on where you come from, the color of your skin, whether you're born in poverty or whether you were born into affluence. Very different experience. And then the DA was talking about some of the experience that young African American men have because of the, relatively speaking, minor offenses for which they are arrested, and that begins an experience which can grow, and that wedge that we talked about, I think the chief used the term wedge, just gets bigger and bigger over time. But, you know, we all talk about, is this an individual responsibility problem? Others said, and I heard it several times, no, this is systemic, society-wide. Well, I tend to think it's a little bit of both. And, you know, it's even more complicated than that, because the mayor and city council can do what you can do, which is in your purview here in Dallas. But we also need people working in Austin that can be engaged and be doing it at the state level. And then we go to the Washington, D.C., where we have a big and diverse country, and where we try to reconcile our differences and come up with some answers. And I know that our sense of urgency is great. And as I said, I told the Floyd family something good will come out of this terrible tragedy. And I think our sense of urgency is great. But I think we also need to take a longer-term view here as well, because this problem did not just occur with the death of George Floyd. And I think it starts with listening to one another. And we talked about, Pastor, you talked about my friend Senator Scott. One of the things he told his colleagues in the Republican conference, now we have only one African-American senator in the Republican conference. We have two African-Americans in the Democratic conference. But what he told us is something that's completely foreign to my experience. He said he's been stopped driving while black on numerous occasions. And, you know, there develops as a result of all this a level of distrust. And that's what we got to me, one of the most important things that's come out of this. We got to find a way to regain the trust of the entire population in the men and women who put themselves on the line to keep our communities safe. And yes, when we need to do the training, we need to, but not every, as Fred pointed out, the sort of stuff that's routine here, de-escalation training, all the support that you have here in Dallas, that's not available for many of the 800,000 law enforcement officers around the country. The experience is so different depending on where you're from and where you work. So I do think there are some things the federal government can do, and we will endeavor to do our very best. I do think that things like transparency, Chief, is really important. That solves a lot of problems. But maybe a national use of force standards or best practices, not so the Dallas County or the Dallas City Police Department knows what to do, because you are engaging in those best practices because of the sophistication, size, and the tax base you have here to work with. But that's not true in a lot of places around the country. And so those are some things that I think that Congress can do, and much as we've done in the mental health space with prioritizing grants for de-escalation training for law enforcement. It saves officers' lives, and it saves the lives of people who are experiencing a mental health crisis. But this is a big problem, and I think it's worth our best efforts. And I really, really, really appreciate all of you being here and sharing your thoughts. And this is not the end. We're not just going to do this for an hour and then say, okay, we checked that box. We're going to continue this conversation while we continue to work together and hopefully heal our great country and our and the distrust that exists in large segments of our community that really are something that we're going to have to deal with if we're going to really believe in our fundamental commitment to equal justice under the law, and that every human being is created by God and entitled to be treated with dignity. So thank you very much.
Thank you again, Senator, and thank you to all of you for participating in this discussion today. That concludes our roundtable discussion, and I'm going to ask Tristan, could you tell us what we're going to need to do logistically to make this media availability as useful to everyone who's here? Thanks to the press for being here. So, okay.
Sorry, we're going to, once everyone sort of stands up and moves, we'll pull out these tables to the side here so that all of you can move up, and we'll use the podium here.